Good morning, everyone. It gives me great pleasure to be here with you today. My name is Suzana Almoosawi, and I'm a manager of regulatory consumer research at Philip Morris International. Today, I'll be presenting our research on risk perception of IQOS, a novel heated tobacco product from PMI. I'll be sharing with you key findings on the evolution of risk perception of IQOS over time and how it's associated with different use behaviors. To begin with, we all know that successful implementation of the population harm reduction strategy depends not only on the degree of risk reduction of a smoking alternative, but also on the degree of its acceptance and adoption among smokers who would otherwise continue to smoke. One of the key factors that influences adoption among smokers is risk perception. Risk perception can both promote switching away from cigarettes to a smoke-free alternative, as well as minimize relapse or reinitiation among smokers who already switched from cigarettes. Mounting research evidence also demonstrates that risk misperception relative to cigarettes can act as a barrier, impeding switching as well as increasing relapse and reinitiation among smokers who have already made the switch to a smoke-free alternative. What is concerning is that an increasing number of qualitative and quantitative studies have shown that smokers largely misperceive the risk of smoke-free alternatives, and that misperception is growing over time. As you can see in the graph on the right-hand side, over 60% of smokers perceive the risk of smoke-free alternatives such as snus and e-cigarettes to be the same or higher than cigarettes. At the same time, there is little knowledge of the evolution of the risk perception of heated tobacco products such as IQOS. To address this gap in the scientific literature, our study evaluated the temporal changes in the risk perception of IQOS relative to cigarettes and examined how these changes are associated with use behavior. We measured absolute risk perception of cigarettes and IQOS using a validated instrument called the About Perceived Risk instrument. The instrument allows us to measure an individual's perceived health risk of cigarettes as well as of IQOS. To achieve this, survey members are asked to complete a set of questions covering 18 health items. Survey members rank their risk perception from 1 to 5, 5 being very high risk. A score is then calculated for the absolute risk perception of cigarettes as well as the risk perception of IQOS. Relative risk is calculated as the difference in risk perception of cigarettes minus risk perception of IQOS. We use data from a repeated cross-sectional survey among a representative sample of legal age IQOS users. We utilize data from Japan as it was one of the markets where data is available for at least 4 years since the launch of IQOS. We used linear regression to examine the association between relative risk perception of IQOS and time or use behavior. In terms of sample characteristics, overall the mean age increased over time, reflecting the change in IQOS owners' population. There was also a change in the type of users. Exclusive use and dual use with combustible declined over time, while use with non-combustible products increased. In this case, the use with non-combustible reflects use of different brands of heated tobacco products. Length of ownership also increased over time. In relation to risk perception, as you can see this graph, absolute risk perception of cigarettes remained stable over time, while absolute risk perception of IQOS increased. This was then reflected in a gradual decline in relative risk perception of IQOS across the survey years. Relative risk perception declined across all use behaviors. However, we can see that relative risk perception was lower among dual users with combustible compared to exclusive users. Relative risk perception was also lower for more recent IQOS users in the last few years, while intensity of use followed the same trend as type of use behavior. When we included all of the variables in a regression model, we observed clearly that relative risk perception of IQOS declined over time, and that it was lower among dual users with combustible compared to exclusive users. So what does this mean in terms of implications? First, our study findings are aligned with previous research indicating an overall decline in risk perception of smoke-free products. Second, our findings confirm other research showing that use behavior is related to risk perception. However, given the cross-sectional design of the survey, we cannot address causality and whether use behavior drives risk perception or vice versa. Nonetheless, because of the significant effect of risk perception on complete switching to smoke-free alternatives, it's important that adult smokers are correctly informed about the risk of different tobacco products in order to reduce misperceptions. My colleague, Karina Fisher, will present later findings from our longitudinal panels that indeed demonstrate that risk perception leads to different use behaviors. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
Thank you.